So these are sort of the typical kind of PR pretty pictures of folks in biotech. Let's another one. So what is biotech? What does, and I'm going to talk about biotech pharmaceuticals. Biotech more broadly would cover things like the plant work that Monsanto does, for instance, of genetically engineered, genetically modified plants. I don't know anything about that. My experience has been in the biopharma field. So it kind of strictly, biotech is sort of defined in distinction from pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceuticals are the traditional therapeutic drugs like aspirin or Lipitor, which are chemically synthesized. Biotech is about using recombinant DNA. And so you're making products like proteins, vaccines, monoclonal antibodies in particular, but also some other more exotic stuff like petrobodies and stem cell therapy and antisense diets. But the big biotech firms are essentially involved in protein and monoclonal antibody therapies, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about. And and those are made by cell culture, then has to be purified. It's a much more sensitive operation than making pills from chemicals. So that's it. Now, biopharma, though, can also pretty much be used to describe any developmental drug company. So you will hear people talk about Gilead as a biotech. I think actually they're more making chemical, but they are at the cutting edge of therapies, and therefore they can be regarded as biotech. Also in Atlanta, you'll sometimes hear any medical device or drug therapy enterprise, small ones, developmental ones being thought of as biotech, and that's fine. But the fundamentals are more this. And let me give you a couple of examples, and let's see if you've heard of any of these. The four big companies that have been successful are Amgen, Genentech, Biogen, and Genzyme. And you see Gen in every one of those names, so genetically engineered drug therapies. And have any of you heard of any of those companies? No. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, they are pretty significant. These first two now, Genentech has just been taken over by Roche. I actually worked with Roche briefly on that merger, and so we lost one of the two leaders. These were the two big. Both of them are on the West Coast. One of the reasons you haven't heard of them is that Amgen is in Thousand Oaks, California, and Genentech is in San Francisco. Biogen is in Boston, and Genzyme is in Boston. So that's why, part of why you don't know about them. But it's also because you look at the products, these are their blockbuster products, and each of these is selling over $1 billion a year, which is kind of the industry definition of a blockbuster product. And I bet you haven't, or I hope you haven't heard of it. Because if you have, it means that someone in your family or you yourself has had a pretty severe illness of one kind or another. And whereas I expect you've heard of Lipitor, partly because it's advertised, but partly because, you know, statistically probably half of your parents take Lipitor or something similar, right? So whereas statistically, one hopes none of you, I mean, there are enough of you in the room that probably someone in your family has had the need for one of these. Let's sort of talk quickly about what they are. Epogen was the very first blockbuster biotech product. Came out in about '89, so 20 years ago, 21 years ago. It's a red blood cell stimulant, and it was originally used for people having kidney dialysis. who would suffer anemia. Anemia is a side effect of dialysis. Epogen boosts causes the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells, and it's a protein. In other words, there is a natural protein in the body that does that, and by giving people more of it, it causes brain. So that was number one. It's now used about as much in cancer patients who also get anemia from chemotherapy. So that's what it's for. They're called adjuvant. They don't cure anything, but they help deal with some side effects, in this case anemia. Aranesp is just a long-acting version of that. What's the big deal of that? The big deal of that is patents. In the pharmaceutical game and in the biotech game, you are trying to keep your monopoly on a therapy for as long as possible to get the highest return on your R&D investment as possible. And Aranesp was just putting a little doohickey onto the end of the Epogen molecule so that it would stay in the body longer. And the biggest reason for that was you could then get around some patent problems that they had. I won't bore you with that, but it's important to know because in this industry, the IP lawyer, the intellectual property lawyers, are almost as important as the R&D scientists. And that's because you're trying to protect the value of what you're creating. And it can get rather unseemly, but that's what it is. They spend a lot of time and money suing each other. Neulasta is a long-acting version of a thing called Epogen, which is a white blood cell stimulant. So very similar to Epogen, except white blood cells. That was for people having chemotherapy. So again, didn't cure anything, but if you have chemotherapy, your white cells go way down, you become extremely prone to infection. That limits the amount of chemotherapy in some cases you can have. Febrile neutropenia is the condition that people get when they get feverish from very low white blood cells. They have to be hospitalized, maybe on IV antibiotic, nasty, could kill you. Neupogen and Neulasta, long-acting version of that, second generation drug. Enbrel is for rheumatoid arthritis. That is not a cure, but it addresses the disease straight on, unlike these which are adjuvants. Genentech came out with quite a lot, but the blockbusters are these three. Now, they all address cancers at different times. They are therapies, and if you're looking for real sort of medical breakthrough value, although Amgen's was my client for 15 years, and I'm friends with a bunch of people there. I've got to say, Genentech, more success in terms of actually curing or coming close to curing some diseases. Rituxan for non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Herceptin for HER2-positive breast cancer, and Avastin for colon cancer and possibly for breast cancer, maybe for some others. Some pretty significant therapeutic advantages from Rituxan and from Herceptin, frankly less so for Avastin. It delays disease progression, delays death, but not by a whole lot. And that's one of the things about these products is they have not cured death, and which is of course impossible to do. But you would like to be able to cure some of the diseases that at the moment are the ones that knock us over the edge. And the promise hasn't been fully fulfilled, but Rituxan probably comes somewhat close. I think non-Hodgkin's lymphoma is now much lower mortality rate than before Rituxan came in. Interesting enough, Genentech's role there was not to develop the drug, but was to spot it and buy it at an advantageous price. It was not Genentech science to develop the drug. Biogen, these two drugs are for multiple sclerosis.